In the 14th century, the dialogue of Saint Catherine of Sienna was dictated by the saint to her secretaries during her ecstasies, in which God the Father gave her many insights into the faith and Scripture. In this episode, we listen to God the Father explain to Saint Catherine about how each of us achieves virtue and vices through the good or sin against our neighbor. And he gives insight into Jesus' words to love our neighbor as ourselves. In Dialogue 1.7, under the subject of Divine Providence, we read, "You achieve every virtue and every defect by means of your neighbor. Therefore, those who hate me injures their neighbor and themselves, who are their own chief neighbor. This injury is both general and particular. It is general because you are to love your neighbor as yourself, and in loving them, you should help them spiritually through prayer and by counseling them with words. Help them both spiritually and temporally, according to their needs, at least with your goodwill, if nothing else. A person who does not love does not help their neighbor and thus harms themselves. They are cut off from grace and harms their neighbor by depriving them of the benefit of the prayers and sweet desires they are bound to offer for their neighbor to me. Every act of help they perform should proceed from charity, through love of me. Every evil is also done by means of their neighbor. If they do not love me, they cannot have charity for their neighbor. Hence, all evils derive from the soul's lack of love for me and their neighbor. Since this person does no good, it follows that they must do evil. To whom does he commit evil? First to himself, and then to his neighbor. But not against me, for no evil can touch me, except in so far as I count that evil done to themselves as being done to me. They harm themselves through sin, which deprives their neighbor of grace. They hurt their neighbors by not paying them the debt of love which they owe them. This assistance is owed to every rational creature, but its usefulness is more when it is done to those who are close at hand. You are obliged to help one another by word, doctrine, the example of good works, and every other respect your neighbor may be in need. You should counsel them exactly as you would yourselves, without self-love. The person who does not love God does not do this because he has no love toward his neighbor. He does his neighbor evil, not only by not doing them the good they might do, but by doing them positive harm and constant evil. In this way, sin causes a physical and mental injury. The mental injury is done when the sinner enjoys the idea of sin and hatred of virtue, and takes pleasure in sensual self-love, which deprives him of the affection of love that he should have towards me and his neighbor. They then conceive one sin after another against their neighbor, according to the various ways that please their perverse sensual will. They sometimes engage in cruelty. It is general cruelty to see oneself and others in danger of death and damnation through lack of grace and do nothing. The sinner is so cruel that they do not help themselves or others by loving virtue and hating vice. They may even want to be crueler by playing the devil and tempting others to forsake virtue and embrace vice. This is spiritual cruelty, as they make themselves an instrument to destroy life and to give death. This miserable vice of cruelty will eventually deprive the one who practices it of all mercy, unless they practice kindness and compassion towards their neighbor. If a proud person holds a position of authority, they also produce injustice and cruelty. Whom does pride hurt? Their neighbors. They injure their neighbor when, in their opinion of themselves, they make themselves superior to their neighbor and look down on them. Dearest daughter, grieve over the offenses committed against me, and weep over these dead ones, so that, by prayer, the bands of their death may be loosened. See now that in all places and in all kinds of people, sin is always produced against the neighbor, for there is no sin that does not touch others. You commit a secret sin when you deprive your neighbor of that which you should give them. You commit an open sin when you perform positive acts of sin. Therefore, it is indeed true that every sin committed against me is done through the means of your neighbor.